We're in a series called Overflow. I hope you're ready for it. This has really kind of been the theme of our church for an entire year. So we kind of focus on an idea, a thought for an entire year. We kick it off in February. And this idea of overflow is that, and it's kind of been this idea for this series, that what's in your heart will overflow in your life. And what we want to do is have some things overflow out of our lives. What is overflowing out of your life? A lot of us, maybe this past year, as you think back, what has overflowed out of your life? You might say, hey, there's been a lot of good things. There's been a lot of bad things. There's been some things that I wish I could forget. But what's in your heart will overflow in your life. I want to share a story of why I believe God has blessed Cornerstone really these past 10 years. You know, we're about to celebrate 10 years as a church. And a lot of y'all know the beginning of the story. We had about 60 people. The average age was 65. I was 30 years old at the time. We had 3 kids in the nursery. 2 of them were ours. We were doing our part right. And but before the story, there's actually a prequel, right? Before there was Lord of the Rings, there's like The Hobbit, or you could think of any other movie, right? It's kind of like the prequel to the story. And here's the kind of prequel to the story of this church. One of the cool things is obviously Cornerstone's been here for 10 years, but the shell of this building that we're in right now, this shell, there was a Presbyterian church that met here, and this shell has been here since the 1900s. Like 1901, I think, is when this was built. And then everything else you see kind of around on the outside's from the 70s. The kids' wing area is like from the 1920s. Just really cool, a lot of history in this particular building. But obviously that church started to dwindle off, and another church had purchased it and kind of moved in. And the sad reality is with new churches is that 90% of new churches will fail and die in the first 4 years. I serve and work with church planners all across the state of Alabama in assessing them, making sure couples are ready to plant churches. And the sad reality is 90% of them don't make it past 4 years. It's really, really difficult to start a brand new church. And the church that came in here did not make it, and that church actually fell apart, and that's what left those 60 people. Aaron and I were here at the time, and we had a goal. We had been approved by an agency to actually plant a church, and our goal was to go to, this shouldn't surprise anyone, Denver, Colorado, where I wanted to plant a church. We had a name picked out. We had all these things, and we were really praying about an area of Denver Metro that we were going to go and plant a church. So when all of these things happened, we kind of felt like we needed to help with the transition period, because that's a lot for a church to go through. And as we kind of stepped into this area, here I am, 30 years old. I don't know anything about this. I've been in churches before, but I've never been like the person that had been leading the charge before. And one of the first things that we had to do right away was there were several missionaries that church supported. But the problem was there was no longer that church to support those missionaries. There's just like a fracture of what was left. You're talking like a church overnight went from 250 to 60 people. There's a total difference in finances and everything. And the sad reality is for many missionaries are really reliant on churches and individuals and their generosity to support them in their work so they can actually go be all over the world spreading the gospel or some type of missions agency. And it happens all the time where churches say, we don't have the funding to support you anymore. Individual situations come up and say, we can't help you anymore, or agencies close. And so missionaries have a really tough time. And I think these missionaries would have understood had I had a conversation with them that said something like this: I'm so sorry, but that church that was supporting you is no longer here, and the funding that you receive from them has ceased. You're not going to be getting anything else anymore. And I think they would have understood that, because the other option was, if we give them this money that we don't have, this fractured group of people may not even make it as well either. They would have to close its doors. It was a really tough decision. And one of the things that we decided, if this church was going to move forward, we decided that missions was not going to be optional. Generosity was not going to be optional, that we were going to trust the Lord, we were going to do what's right. It says in James 4:17, for him that knows to do right and fails to do it, for him it is sin. So we knew as a church what the right thing for us to do was, and it was to continue to support these missionaries, even though we didn't have the funding for it. We just said, all right, God, we're going to trust you by stepping out on faith, and we're going to pray that you take care of it. And so we took that leap of faith, and in that first month of existence, we sent those missionaries money, we did all this stuff. We ended with a zero balance. And let me tell you something, zero is better than negative, right? We didn't have any money, but we didn't lose any money either. But from there, God began to bless because I believe we did the right thing. Now, it's easy to do the right thing when everything is going well in your life, right? It's easy to be generous when you're doing well in your bank account. It's a total different thing to take the right step, to take the leap of faith when things in your life aren't going so well. So that's what I want to talk about today is generosity. I'll do this several times throughout the year, and I get it. Maybe you're here and you're like, dang it, we showed up to church and the pastor's talking about money. What a horrible Sunday to show up. Listen, and I get it. There have been lots of churches and pastors and people you see on TV that have really given the church a bad rap, and they truly do only care about money. But at Cornerstone, one of the things we've always said was, this is not what we want from you. This is what we want for you. And I believe when you experience generosity the way that God intended, you will never go back. So we kind of think about it like this. Generosity is not an amount, it's a mindset. All right? Generosity is not an amount. Generosity is a mindset. And I know some of you are thinking like, yeah, I'd be thinking about it because I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind, right? Like, no. Generosity is more than just money, all right? It's more than just that. It's about your mind, because most of us think about our resources and stuff. We say, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough resource. I don't have enough love. I don't have enough this. I don't have enough that. And we need to adjust our mindset. It's more than just like, hey, if my paycheck got adjusted, then my life would be easier. Sometimes in our life, it's like you just need to sprinkle a little yeast on it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want that stuff to rise. I want it to expand. I want to live that yeasty life, you know? Not too much, you could get infection, but I'm just saying, like, you want that yeast on your life a little bit, and you will see things grow. And I think when you think about your life, can we have fun this morning? We're going to have a little good time. I feel the energy picking up a little bit. All right. We're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8, because it's really incredible the things that we can take from this church, because as Paul was writing to this church, he wrote them 2 different letters. The Corinthians were very similar to Americans in their day and age. They were wealthy. They had everything they could ever want. And Paul was writing to them about the Jewish Christians who were experiencing extreme poverty because they were being persecuted. When you read the book of Acts, you see that the Roman government stepped in and actually started persecuting Christians, throwing them in jail, killing some of them, lighting them on fire just to light the garden, as the Emperor Nero did. And so they were going through some intense persecutions, and because of that, they couldn't get a job just because they were Christians. And so Paul was going around, and they were collecting a special offering for these believers, and he begins talking about the churches in Macedonia and how they stepped up. So in 2 Corinthians 8, I want to read this for you, being verse 1. It says this, "Now I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor." You know what Paul's doing here? This is the equivalent of like a Facebook post that is sharing too much. You ever read someone's post, you're like, you just shared way too much, right? You need to keep some of that to yourself. That's what Paul's doing here. He said, hey, these churches in Macedonia, I mean, these guys are struggling. They're going through a tough time, and not only are they going through a tough time, they is po, all right? They have nothing. He said they're literally poor. But listen to what he said next. But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. To which I think many of us aren't experiencing joy in our life because we're missing generosity in our life. You can only experience this type of joy that comes through generosity. And then Paul continues on, I can testify that not only they gave not only what they could afford, but far more, and they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the new believers in Jerusalem. Can you imagine? He's saying that they gave money, and Paul was like, they were just blown away at these people have nothing, and they're truly just giving everything. And then not only was that, then Paul said they kept begging them to say, no, we want to do more. We want to give more. Like people were like selling houses and stuff. And then Paul's like, whoa, this. You're doing us so much right now. Like this is more than we already expected that you were going to be able to do. They were blown away at what they were actually giving. So this morning, I want to give us 3 shifts in our mindset. If we were to think about generosity in 3 different ways, if we just shifted the way we thought about things, it would change everything. And the first thought is this. We want to go from not enough to more than enough. We want to shift from I don't have enough to I have more than enough. So many of us in the room feel like we don't have enough. Right? How many can I don't have enough. I don't have enough to share. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough, you fill in the blank, to, actually, I have more than enough. I have more than enough time. I have more than enough finances. I have more than enough to share. 2 Corinthians 9:8, in the next chapter, Paul says it this way, God will generously provide all you need. God will literally provide for everything we need, not our wants, but our needs. He says, then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. In other words, as we are generous, God gives us everything that we need. And not only do we have everything we need, we have enough to share with everyone else. So we're shifting this mindset to, I have more than enough. I have more than enough time. How am I using my time? Well, look at your phone screen time. It will tell you how you're using your time. You have enough time. You have enough resources, just like what are you using your resource on? Hey, some of you have your house, whatever it is, you fill in the blank, you have more than enough. See, God's economy is backwards, and it's really crazy when you read the scriptures. It's this doesn't make sense. For instance, in the Bible, you see all throughout it, from Old Testament all the way to New, this idea of tithing, this idea that we give 10% of what we earn back to God. And what's really crazy about that is but Daniel, as an Asian guy, I do math, okay? And so 90% is never more than 100%. Never. It never works like that. 90 is always less than 100. But God expects us as followers of Christ to give 10% back. And I'm letting you know that 90% with God's blessings is always more than 100% of you having your own finances, doing it your own way. It never works out. So you have enough. But we think when I give, I lose something, right? Because I see my bank account, it's going down, that's a loss. But actually in God's economy, when you give, you gain something. You gain the opportunity to be a part of God's work. For instance, when you give to Cornerstone, you gain the opportunity to be able to be a part of reaching countless lives. It's the same thing when you think about serving. It's I have to serve today. No, I get to serve today, and I get to make an impact on someone's life. I'm creating an environment that people want to show up to. They will sit in this service. God will do something in their life. It will forever change them, all because you chose to serve. You choose to serve on the kids wing, and thank you for all of you that do. And we're constantly, adding new people that want to be a part of impacting the next generation. And I get it. Sometimes for those of you who serve the 4-year-olds, you double stars in heaven. I'm just letting you know that there are extra rewards in heaven. I don't know that for sure. I'm just saying I believe that to be true. When you serve up there and you give of your time, man, you're gaining something. It's not a loss, and that's what it is. It's the same thing for that opportunity for us as a church at the very beginning. It was we gained the opportunity as a brand new church. We didn't have to look for missionaries. They were already there. We gained the opportunity to be a part of works all over the world, and it was crazy. And we had to take that leap of faith. That's what faith is. It's taking a step, not knowing what's going to come next. But I get it. Like, I've been a cynical person myself. Maybe you're a little cynical. You're like, Daniel, it's easy to decide for the church if the church is going to give to missions because it's not your money. It's not your bank account. So is it really difficult to make a decision when it doesn't affect you? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that brings us to our next shift in our mindset from my resources to God's resources. Everything that you have is not yours. It belongs to God. And literally, some of the things you have don't belong to you anyway. It belongs to the bank that owns it until you pay it off. And then it's yours. But even when it's yours, it's still actually God's. So how do we leverage what we have for the Lord? Like, all right, God's given me a vehicle. How can I leverage that for God? God's given me a house. How can I leverage that for the Lord? God's given me money. How can I leverage that for God? God's given you the ability to work, so it allows you to make money. Everything you have in life is not because of you, but it's because of God. And when you look at your life like that, like none of this is mine anyways, it's God's, how am I going to use it? And Paul was challenging the believers in Corinthians. Like, you drop down in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 10. Paul was like challenging him on like, hey, this is what the Macedonians did. And listen to what he says. Here's my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. Last year, you were the first ones who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. Now, you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed at the beginning be matched now by your giving, given to proportion to what you have. In other words, Paul was saying there's a difference in being eager and actually following through. I think of like a 90s country song, a little less talk and a lot more action. I feel like I just got my voice back too, like I sing a little more. I think the song's talking about something else, but it's the words, all right? We're focusing on the words. Less talk, more action. Here, if you've come to Cornerstone, you're brand new here, whatever the line is, I like to be very close to it, all right? Just as we all have flaws. We all have flaws. That one is mine, all right? So what Paul is saying is, that's great. You have talked a big game. You ever been around someone, like they talk a big game? Hey, it's time to show up. It's time to do your part now. You said you were going to do this. Now it's time. The proof is in the pudding, and that's what Paul is saying is, hey, you've talked about giving. You've talked about doing all this stuff, and you were all eager to do it. Now stop talking about it and start actually doing it. How often do we say things like that? Oh, yeah, I will do that, and then we don't ever do it. It's all about follow through. And how we actually trust God with what he's given us. Like so many of us, like he's given us so much, yet we don't ever do anything with it. We just talk about it. And now what Paul is saying is, this is not yours anyways. Trust God with it. Stop talking about it and start actually doing it. Do the work you said that you were going to do. And Paul, he's kind of like, hitting him. I mean, it's a little bit of conviction. He said, hey, remember that thing like from 1 year ago? He's reminding him, and now it's a year later, and y'all haven't done nothing. Oh, and just to make it feel a little bit worse, here's some poor people in Macedonia that have nothing, and they're really making you look bad. It's time to step up. That's what Paul tells him. It's time to step up. Do you truly trust God or not? And this brings us to the last shift in our mindset from I'll give when to I'll give now. How many of us have we've done that? Like, I'll give when, the kids move out of the house. I'll give when we pay off the car. I'll give when I get that promotion. I'll give instead of I'll give right now. Paul continue on, right? Remember in verse 10, here's my advice. Do what you did, what you started a year ago. You were the first ones who wanted to. Now actually do it. Verse 11, you should finish what you started. Let your eagerness you've shown give into proportion to what you have. Verse 12, whatever you give, it's acceptable if you give it eagerly, and give according to what you have, not what you don't have. Now, I just have to take a little moment here and be a little bit pastorally. There are a lot of people who will use that verse right there as a reason why they don't have to tithe. Right here, Pastor, it says that you only have to give what you have, not what you don't have. And so you give eagerly. So I don't believe in the tithe. This is New Testament. And to which I would say this, context matters. The context of what's happening here is what? A special one-time offering to the Jewish believers. Paul is not talking about giving to the church at all. The concept of tithe was before Moses. It was Abraham, Moses, and the law. Then Jesus confirmed it. And then so again in the New Testament, can't get away from the fact that the tithe is the way to give. Paul is talking about a one-time gift. I remember our church several years ago, before we even did 2 services. It was just 1 service, but we knew we needed like several things within the church. Like we had so many changes and things we had to do, and we didn't have the money to do it, and we're still brand new. We couldn't take on more debt or anything like that. So we challenged our church that in 1 year, we needed to raise $100,000 over and above regular giving. Like our regular giving couldn't go down because we had a lot of other things going on. So we needed $100,000 over that. And we had people sacrifice. That year, Aaron and I, we were giving it, I think, at 15%, and we doubled it and said, we're going to give an extra 15% just to this. We had people sacrifice, and in 1 year, we raised over $100,000. A lot of what you see in our church today is because of the sacrifice of people. And so what we're talking about and what Paul's talking about here is, hey, give in proportion what you have. Like, this shouldn't be hard on you. And he continues it on. He's like, of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourselves. I only mean that there should be some equality. In other words, he's like, you shouldn't give to the point that it's so difficult that your life is hard. He's like, this is just an extra thing. He's like, just give in a proportion. There should be equality. And we've always said that here at Cornerstone, not equal giving, equal sacrifice. There are some people in this room, like if you gave $1,000 or something, that would be a huge sacrifice. I mean, like, your family's missing out on something, your kids miss out on something, you're not gonna go on the trip that you thought you were gonna go. $1,000 is a lot. And then there are other people in the room, $1,000, you wouldn't even know that it was gone. That's not equal sacrifice, and that's what Paul is talking about here. He says, right now, you have plenty, and you can help those who are in need. Later, they will have plenty and can share when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. In other words, he's saying, hey, there's gonna come a point in your life when you're gonna need help too. And guess what? That's what being human is all about. At some point, we're all going to need help. And right now, you might have the ability to help somebody. But in another moment, you might need help from somebody. And that's what Paul is saying here. It's time to match the generosity of the Macedonians and to step up and to do your part. So instead of saying, I'll give when, it's I'll give now. And hey, here's what I can do. There's no like magic number to like what is like a holy spiritual number. It's just, hey, what can you do? And that's what he's challenging them. Hey, do it right now. Like maybe you're out and about and you see something and you feel moved like, hey, I'm just gonna take care of that person's need right now. I just do it. When God leads you, just do it, right? Or something comes up or whatever the case might be. As it happens, all right, Lord, I wanna do that now. I wanna shift my mindset. I wanna stop making excuses. How many of us, we like constantly make excuses for stuff all the time? Like just stop making excuses like why we can't get whatever. Just be generous. Like it's a mindset. Hey, I'm generous. The poorest person could be generous. Hey, I can share with what I have. Like a homeless person, like we see it a lot. Like, hey, I have 2 pieces of, like my sandwich is cut in half. I have now 2. I can give one to somebody else. That's generous, right? So it's all about our mindset. So it's not about waiting for the right time. Any time is the right time when God is leading you. And that's just, I think, the challenge. I think as God stirs our heart, we give, not equal giving, equal sacrifice, just like what Paul is saying here. It shouldn't be more difficult for one person than the other. And so I would say that's so true here at Cornerstone. Like we would never, like ever put any expectation on any person to go, oh, well, you didn't give today? Well, you're gonna have to stay here until you do. Right? Hey, you're gonna have to serve in Kids Wing until you start giving, right? I'm gonna start checking like giving statements and go, oh, well, like looks like you didn't break this threshold. Looks like you have to serve twice a month now. Like we would never do that. Like that's why as like a pastor, like I've chosen and as elders, we've chosen like to not know what anyone gives in this church. Do you know why? Because it's none of my business. What you do is between you and the Lord, and what I do is between me and God. And I believe if we're just generous people, God takes care of everything else. That's just the way that I think, all right? That's just the way that I feel about it. And I believe that God has given us more than enough already. We live in, honestly, one of the greatest economical environments in the entire world. God has been so gracious to just our country in general. We have more than enough. There are people all over the world, Tegucigalpa, right there in Honduras. They have nothing. And when you go and you walk in a garbage dump and you see the hood of a car and you realize that is someone's house, you realize, we're online, so I'm gonna watch my word here, I'm gonna say it anyways, what a piece of crap we are. How much I forget how much I have, and I complain about what I don't have, when what I don't have is really just a want. So when you think about it differently, you go, wait a minute, God's given me all this. Like, why do I think this? I think like this. And I'm gonna change the way that I think. No, I have more than enough. I'm gonna learn contentment. I'm gonna give. God, like, I want you to use these moments. And I'm telling you, what begins to happen is you get this overwhelming joy, abundant joy. Some of us don't have joy in our life. You might be stingy or selfish. You might be holding tightly to what you have. And so generosity is living with open hands, saying, all right, God, you give and you take away. And whatever you put here, I want to steward it well. And whatever you take away, God, I trust you. But I'm going to give it to you. And I'm just letting you know, when you truly experience generosity the way God intended it, you will never go back. I can promise you there are story after story after story, mine included, of people who just said, God, I open my hands to you. And you see what God does, it will change your life forever. Generosity. So how are you living, and what part of your mind do you need to shift? Let's pray.